2017, I saw the immersion cooling and I was like, man, this stuff's pretty incredible. A lot of people thought it couldn't be done at scale. I've been one of those that's always a big fan. Yeah, make sure you stay inside. You guys, we got a panel coming up right now. There's a misprint on the agenda. But real quickly, I was like, man, this stuff is so cool. And I just don't see a way how the miners, the innovators, won't come up or devise a way to make sure that this thing becomes a reality. So the next panel is going to be talking all about immersion cooling. I'm very excited about that because I am a very big fan of all of the innovation that's taking place in this industry. Real quick breakdown of the last panel, though, before we get to the next one. We're just miking these guys up real fast for you. Transcending the political divide. Man, it's such a big topic because if you're interested in mining, what's the biggest risk to a miner right now? One of the number one risks to any miner is political risk. Regulation, taxation, banning, like what we saw in China. Those things can happen here in the US. They don't happen as quickly, though. All of a sudden, you'll wake up one day and they're passing a law to put a 10% tax on Bitcoin mining in your state. You'll wake up and your utility has regulated that Bitcoin mining can no longer take place in your state or your local precinct. That's why this political stuff is so important, why you'll see it combine with Bitcoin mining. And I think the Bitcoin miners are the most incentivized to make sure that they push their local elected officials any way you want. What, you're going to write letters? Yes. You're going to call your elected officials? Yes. You're even going to see people run. You're going to see Bitcoiners, fully orange-pilled Bitcoiners, run for Congress. I think we already seen one now. You guys seen what's going on with Josh Mandel out in Ohio? Guy is like, he's fully orange-pilled. He completely understands Bitcoin. He understands Bitcoin so well, he even said it's the most important issue of our time. He understood it so well that when he found Erica Rhodes, he said, despite her being on the opposite end of the spectrum, being a Democrat and him being a Republican, that it was important that we support her. That's incredible. Have you ever heard that before? He said that in a live audio room on Twitter Spaces. Bitcoin is bipartisan. This is a huge message that we need to remember here. A lot of people think, oh, it's a Republican issue only, libertarian. It's not. It really isn't. It transcends the political divide. It brings everyone closer together. Fiat is the thing that brings us apart. Fiat is the thing that divides us. And Bitcoin is going to be the thing that brings this country back together. There's so much divisiveness in this country. It's really become pretty sad. Where we're so far apart that when you look back at the other side, you're like, that guy's my enemy. They're not your enemy. That's what they want you to think. So the politics is going to be huge. I know a lot of us, we live in this country and we think the political system is broken. I agree with you. But there's a lot of really great folks working tirelessly every day who understand the broken system and understand how to use it to the benefit of Bitcoin. That's why you see Amanda Cavallari, that's why you see CJ Wilson writing a book, educating lawmakers, putting pressure on policymakers. You know what? You want to know what else policymakers like? They love attention. Social media. Those things drive donations, they drive voters, they drive support. Bitcoin is very popular. There's no anti-Bitcoin voter bloc, right? Most issues that you know of today, name an issue, you think of one. Popular issue. There's always two sides on every coin, whether it's gun rights or various other issues out there. There's always someone for and against it. There's no massive voter bloc that says, we don't want Bitcoin, we want to get rid of that. So because of that, it's massively popular on social media. You saw recently a candidate out of oh no, it was an elected official actually, a senator from Arizona, saying she's going to pass Bitcoin legal tender in her state, which is, again, if you didn't get the opportunity, if you're just coming in here, we'll show it. Scan this QR code, pull your phone out, and you can send a message to your elected officials, members of Congress, in order to send a message to them and let them know. But social media is huge because it's going to allow these people, these politicians, to get more attention, get more support. And a lot of them are really making the steps necessary in order to gain that attention. We've seen also today, or was it last night, a candidate for governor of Arizona said she wants to protect and defend Bitcoin and digital currencies here in the USA. 2 years ago, would you have thought that was possible? That in the United States we'd be trying to pass legal tender? I certainly wouldn't have thought so. But it's happening right now. All right, real quick. Are we ready over here? Looks like we're close. Yeah. All right, guys. We're going to be heading to this next panel. I'm very excited to be having this immersion panel up for you guys. Oh, man, this is the future of Bitcoin right here. This is the future of Bitcoin mining, digital asset mining. You can overclock your machines. You can disperse the heat. Fun stuff, man. You guys, the innovators in this room and the innovators out there and the innovators on this panel are what make Bitcoin mining so special. So real quickly, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the speakers to this next panel. Really excited to have the moderator, Tone Vase, Ultra Super OG, come up here. Trader, 10 years Wall Street. He's got this new event coming up, his latest event, Unconfiscatable. Make sure you go. It's March. Tone, what's up, man? Good to see you. Buddy. Yeah.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Next person on the panel, David Branscombe. David is the Director of Business Development and of Business Development at his company. Thank you, David, coming up. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Midas Immersion.
Midas Immersion, yeah, thank you.
There you go.
Sorry about that. Next up, we got Justin Padella, CEO of Elite Mining. Let's go, Justin. Come on up, buddy. After him, we have Scott Johnson. Scott Johnson is the president of Digital Shovel. Give it up for John. Next up, we got Jonathan Juan.
Those lights are bright.
Jonathan is the founder of Coin Heated. Give it up for Jonathan. And last but not least, we've got Gary Testa. Gary, come on up, man. Gary's the president and CEO of Engineered Fluids.
Headshot to show that I don't have hair anymore.
Yeah. I'm not even on there. Look at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Dennis. All right, guys. Hey, can we throw some more time on the clock? I think we have until top of the hour, so at least 40 minutes this way. And no one is panicking that we're running out of time. Thanks, guys. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's an absolutely great event. Love coming back to Texas, especially Austin. My name is Tone Vase. Those of you that are familiar with my work, those that aren't, Google the YouTube channel. I have the conference coming up, Unconfiscatable. Those interested in attending, come find me after. I can give you a personal discount in person. But I do want to talk to the panels. We have a little bit of time, only 40 minutes, talk about a really serious topic, so I want to spend all my time on that. We're just going to jump right into it. Well, how many of you went to the mine on the tour yesterday on stage? Anybody go? No,
So I've been down to the mine before.
Oh, you've been there before?
Not on
Not
this
yesterday.
tour, so I have seen
Not
it.
yesterday. Okay. I didn't make it as well, but I heard amazing things. I've been to one mine with immersion cooling a while ago, and they had one miner per tank. But it was very interesting. I know I learned a lot by being there. But let's just start with the high level. What are some of the advantages and potential disadvantages of running immersion cooling as a miner at all levels? Yeah, we'll just start here and go down the line.
Well, I think there's really kind of three key advantages. The first and foremost is obviously the overclocking. That's the biggest right, advantage, being able to overclock easily at 20 to 30%.
And that's being recorded for the general public. So can you just
Okay.
explain what overclocking means for someone that
Sure.
isn't
Sure.
up to speed
So
with
you're
that?
taking your miner, and it may be pre-configured for 104 terahash, 95 terahash, whatever that is, and let's say it's running about 3,000 watts. The ability to overclock means you're going to get more terahash out of that, but you are going to have more power. So what you're doing is just increasing the density of your footprint. So it's not quite linear, but it's pretty close. So if you're going to overclock by 30%, you're going to, instead of running 3,000 watts, you're going to run, right around 4,000 or maybe a little bit higher.
All right, great. Okay, so what are some of the other advantages?
It eliminates corrosion, right? So the dielectric fluid does a great job of stopping the particulate matter, moisture, things like that actually, degrade the minor components over time. We've got studies to show that it really does a fantastic job of eliminating the particulate matter and the moisture itself. And then kind of the final one is really just kind of a density in the footprint, right? You're going to save money. Let's say you've got 1 megawatt of power that you can have access to. Well, you would normally need like 330 miners to take advantage of that if they're all running at 3,000 watts. But if you're overclocking, you just reduce the amount of miners. You may only need 200, 250 miners per megawatt. It's a huge savings in your cost, your miner cost.
All right, let's go down the line.
Yeah, so agree with what he said there. Ultimately, the bottom line is really cost savings is probably it is the ultimate metric that you need to use. You can substantiate a lot more hash power for the cost of the miners that you're actually deploying. So at the end of the day, when you're talking, you can spend, especially at scale, $1 million versus $700,000 or $600,000. That's a massive benefit and incentivizes all of us to do immersion. So there's that. Plus another advantage that a lot of people kind of overlook is the death rate. What we call the death rate. So miners just last, in general, a lot longer. Those are the two that I would like to add. That way, I'll save a few for them down the line. So.
And well, Scott, you're new. You're just about to convert into it. So maybe mention a challenge that you're dealing with.
Yeah,
trying to do it.
So I guess, I mean, the biggest challenge, there are cost savings in certain things and advantages to overclocking the miner and stuff, but the cost of setting it up historically was somewhat prohibitive. It's certainly getting a lot better than it was, go back 5-6 years ago. But the cost is definitely a massive challenge or disadvantage to it out the gate of initial investment. But I agree with the other panelists here in terms of the advantages for sure.
And Jonathan, sounds like you have some awesome advantages after in addition to the mining part.
Absolutely. I mean, immersion is a higher cost up front, but once you have that heat in the oil, you can take that heat and transfer it further away. In an air-cooled environment, it's only as far as you can get that air away. You could actually take and when you convert it to a water loop, you could run it as far away as you want. And so in very hot climates like Texas, you can scale up your cooling beyond what a air-cooled could do because you're only limited by the chips on the actual ASICs and the air you can run through that. So once you can scale it up, doesn't matter if you have 120-degree air temperature, if your cooling solution is enough, you can bring those actual chip temperatures down more. And so then I'm actually taking that heat and putting it to practical applications like heating a large swimming pool, heating a house. You can actually do that much more efficiently through an oil setup than you can with air.
Oh, that sounds awesome. And Gary, close us out on this one.
So the only advantage that hasn't been mentioned is really what happens during the operation phase of a mine. Cleaning, constantly having to clean air-cooled miners to keep them online, the constant resetting that you see due to thermal events, all of that is eliminated. So in very large-scale mining, the ability to reduce the number of on-site personnel, the ability to eliminate, as was already mentioned, the death rate and failure rate, particularly in the early parts. For those of you that had experience with the S-17s, you'll know that in air, you had a 70% failure rate. We had a 0% failure rate in BitCool.
Let's stay on that side. We'll go from the back. So, Gary, so you guys are responsible for making the coolant liquid. So which solution do you guys provide, and what are other solutions for people to know differences and why you've chosen your path?
Sure. So we are the primary manufacturer of dielectric coolants in Bitcoin mining today. So we manufacture BitCool. We also do electric-cool, which is used for GPUs and servers. We started a company back in 2017, really focused originally on data centers and got involved through some friends in Bitcoin mining. And our primary business is actually in electric vehicle cooling as well. But the advantages to completely synthetic biodegradable products like ourselves is really that they have a very low impact environmentally. They're completely recyclable. They dramatically increase the performance of the miners. And so, when you're looking at what type of coolant you're going to use, you really are looking either generally at a mineral oil-based product that has a lot of sulfur in it, will cause corrosion long-term, copper sulfates, which are highly conductive and things like that, as opposed to a product like BitCool that's totally synthetic. There it has a 10-year operating life. We'll actually offer a 10-year guarantee on our product as well as material compatibility guarantees, which generally you won't find from any of the standard products like mineral oil and things, where you really don't even have any batch processing control.
All right, so let's go through the industrial life cycle. You guys build the fluid. Now you got to ship it. Has that been a challenge, especially with COVID and the supply chain?
So the biggest...
anyone on this panel receiving that fluid, and what do they do next? What do they have to do?
Well, I'll make a quick comment on shipping. Anybody who's in the supply chain knows that just finding trucks these days is a problem. We ship everything from 20-liter containers up to 25,000-liter tanker trucks full of BitCool all over the world. And so we have suffered like everyone else. I will tell you that it's getting a lot easier now than it was 4 months ago.
All right, one more. Anybody here a fan of Breaking Bad? Remember that scene when they siphoned off the liquid by stopping the train? Is that a concern?
We haven't had that problem yet. We have shipped a couple of train tankers, but we've not had anybody trying to steal it yet. Not like that.
All right, so what happens next? I don't know if David, because you guys build these solutions from start to finish, right? So you get your hands on the fluid. What do you do next?
Well, so what we do is we try to remain fluid agnostic because, Gary's coming up with new fluids. A lot of people are entering the marketplace. What is working now may not be as advantageous 6 months from now, et cetera. So we try to remain agnostic and basically provide kind of like a test results, right? To say, okay, what might work for your application in this miner might not be the best for this other model, Bitmain versus, what's miner, whatever. And everybody likes to mine a little differently, right? So if someone's mining for, 20 to 25% overclock and, and that's where they're at, then, we might make a certain recommendation. We might go another direction if they're saying, okay, we're putting custom PSUs on our miners and we're going 50% or higher. It's just going to depend on the application. So we take that information and engineer a design around that gives them, maximum efficiency. Our goal is to give them as much cooling power as possible for the least amount of cost and the least amount of power consumption.
Gotcha. All right, I'll go over to Justin. So have you guys run into any firmware issues? Like, does it matter which mining pools you're mining with and how you're mining them? And what hardware do you have to alter in order to start building out the operation in immersion?
Yeah, so start with the firmware. Essentially, it does matter. It's very significant. In fact, it's probably one of the most critical points of actually immersion mining is that if you don't have the proper firmware, it doesn't work with your miners, then it's a no-go. It's a non-starter. So essentially, you have to absolutely have the right firmware to start off with. It has to be compatible on different ranges. S19 Pros versus T19s. Generally more firmware is available for the larger in-demand or more supplied miners. So the ones that are less supplied are typically the ones that don't receive the attention that they deserve, even though some of them have some amazing overclocking ability. So immersion is really aligned with a good firmware and making sure you have good support on that. That's first thing. And then in designing, I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question? I apologize, Tone. Any you have to alter on the hardware side. Yeah, definitely alterations on the hardware side for sure. So in our systems, we used to in our R&D, do a lot of modifications on the miners themselves, but we stopped doing that as much and just trying to adapt our full immersion mining pod system to tailor to the miners themselves. We found that the amount of manpower and muscle you need to specifically modify every single system and part it's a super large amount of time sink and not very cost efficient. So just a recommendation for everybody, if you're getting into immersion right now, tinker with it all you want, but at the end of the day, you really want to try to have the machine work as it is the best you can, and then design your tanks and your flow around the miners. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. You'll have a hell of a time. So.
All right, Scott, so we'll go over to you since you guys are looking to do this switch, which is a little different than Justin. You guys wanted to put in all of the money and effort to start it from scratch with immersion. You guys are converting to immersion. Are you finding that certain miners are better suited for immersion, or not really, not to put, you know, mining manufacturing on the spot?
We're trying to, like David, try to remain kind of agnostic both on the fluid and the miner itself. Not really reinventing the wheel on the tank. More focusing on trying to drive some efficiency with the power supplies. A lot of people don't realize when you overclock a conventional Bitmain power supply or the miner and then inherently put more load on the power supply, the efficiency drops off significantly.
Yep.
So while you're getting advantages of extra improvement with your miner, you're seeing anywhere from a 5 to 10% fall off in terms of efficiency on the power supply. So that's one of our key focuses and challenges we're trying to overcome right now.
Gotcha. By the way, feel free to jump in if you have something to add to something someone else says. Go ahead, Jonathan. No,
Yeah,
go ahead.
going with what Gary was saying about the S17s, I have 17 S17s, and what I found is that in immersion and then connected to a pool over a 24-hour period, my temperature variance is only 1 or 2 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh.
Versus if you're running air cooled, you're subject to whatever it is. It could be 20 degrees, 30 degrees Fahrenheit easily, and so that really just it causes a lot more problems with it. S19s are better, Watts miners are better, but for the longevity of an ASIC, the less heat cycles that you have, the more stable that temperature is, the better it is.
Yeah, so John, so it sounds like you're making a good case that even if you are an at-home miner with just a handful of ASICs, you may still want to look into this solution.
I'd highly recommend it. Yeah, as long as you're going to be in it for, a year or 2 or 5 or 10, you're already investing 10,000, multiple tens of thousands of dollars in this at home. Wouldn't you want to protect that investment long term? I hear like, oh, it's so expensive. All this oil is so expensive, but you're protecting $60,000 or $100,000. Is it not worth a couple grand in oil and a proper setup?
Well, I know Gary's obviously going to agree. He's building the.
Well, we sell hundreds of small tanks a month to home miners. And I will tell you, what's really important about that is that we find that all of our largest customers start with one, right? I mean, it's the way the whole market is. And so if we don't support that side of the market, bringing in these home miners, getting these guys and gals set up and going, whether it's immersion or air-cooled, it doesn't grow the industry. So we've been really focused. We publish a full 80-page presentation on how to do it. We teach you how to build your tank, all that. And it's all to support what we're doing to grow the industry as a whole. So I think supporting that home miner is super important.
And on that note, I guess one other advantage we didn't talk about earlier is the reduction in sound. Like that is a massive challenge. We've built a lot of really big farms, and if I tell most of my clients, if you can see the house, they're going to hear it.
Yes,
exactly.
And that is not a problem with immersion cooling.
And especially if you're doing at-home mining and you got an unhappy spouse, like, why is that shop vac noise running 24/7? And like,
that's probably the single biggest comment we get when we get feedback is, "My wife loves me now."
Yeah.
Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, it's important to mention that exponentially, as the prices of the market go up, Bitcoin goes through, to the moon essentially. The more and more attractive immersion becomes because your mining hardware cost increases significantly. So if you have, again, that back to the equilibrium thing I said originally, which is essentially when it comes down to buying a lot or at least dipping your toe in the water just to get started, the more the hardware costs, the more worthwhile immersion is, and that's going to remain true forever, basically.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize I think a lot of people look at it and they say, okay, you know, this immersion is going to cost me more than if I just set up shelves and, you know, put up my miners and plug them in, which is true initially, but but that's comparing apples to apples. You're really, air and immersion is really more apples to oranges, right? They're two completely different things. So even if you're only, let's say you're doing 5 miners at home, right? And let's say it's 10 grand a pop, worst case scenario. You're looking at $50,000 you're investing in your future, right? That's great. But if you can overclock by 25%, right? You don't need that 5th miner to use the same amount of power and get the same amount of terahash, right? So it's very important to look at it that way. If you do that, you're talking about, okay, well, I'm saving $10,000 as a home miner. What could you do with $10,000? You could probably get yourself a immersion cooling system, right? Yeah, you might have to do some of it on your, you know, on your own and you know, use Gary's videos and things like that. But I mean, 10 grand and some sweat equity. I mean, you could have a great little setup at home, and you're also set up for the future. So let's say, you know, your S19 dies, you have something weird happen, and it was just a bad manufacturing issue, and you upgrade. You take the new miner and put it in the same tank. A lot of these systems are set up for, you know, basically sustainability, right? For future, not 100% future proof, but quite a bit of room for you down the road to continue to grow and be a part of this.
I think you brings up a really good question. One of the primary things that everybody asks us about is, what's the ROI?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that is the primary reason. So when you get a quote from us, if you do a systems quote, we'll actually give you the full ROI model. In Excel, you can enter in all your own data. You can put in your power costs. You can put in all of your known air operation costs and get a direct apples to apples comparison. I will tell you that on average for a megawatt-based system, your payoff period is less than 3 months.
What in some cases, I think your ROI is like yesterday. Like, I mean,
It can be, yeah.
it can be, yeah. With one megawatt, depending on the system you're using, when you're also getting up in, you know, 1 megawatt, you're talking about scale, right? You're talking about scaling up larger. But if you get to that point, I mean, in the I guess the example I mentioned earlier, you go from 330 miners to like 250 miners, right? If you are paying 8 to 10 grand a miner, that's like you're saving $1.3 million on your investment, right? Our system specifically, I don't know what everybody else does, but it usually runs anywhere from, you know, 225 to 275 a megawatt. Well, you've saved yourself like $750,000. But it's scalable. It works the same if you're using 5 miners or 5,000. It doesn't matter. It's still just a mathematical equation that works no matter what level you want to get into.
Absolutely.
All right, so the word sustainability was mentioned. So let's talk about that. Bitcoin's been demonized left and right for how much energy it takes up. The recent argument against it is, well, like drying your clothes burns more energy than Bitcoin. Why is everybody hanging it up? My personal example has historically been video game playing draws way more energy than Bitcoin, and I don't see that as being as productive to the world as Bitcoin mining. So what do you guys want to comment on how much cleaner it's getting to mine Bitcoin, and just the whole demonization of the energy use? Floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll just jump right in. Sorry.
Okay.
So basically, yeah. So basically, I mean, and I see this everywhere because we deploy remotely around the U.S. and it's starting to get up to Canada now. But ultimately, all these sites, they're typically remote. There's some kind of cyclical waste. They're not using it for anything anyways. A lot of it is not oil and gas, and you know, something that's going to be used to power homes instead. It's one of these narratives that is. I mean, it's been 8 years now I've been in this space, and every single time I talk about it, just like roll eye, right? It's like, roll eye. And the reality, guys, is that, you know, most of the Bitcoin energy consumed is in BFE, you know, places that are remote, that you're never gonna, if you never drive by them on the highway, for the most part. Of course, there's exceptions to that, but it's definitely the rule rather than the exception. And, you know, so that energy isn't being used anyways, and then, yeah, I'll give some
It's just going to disappear anyways.
Exactly.
Right? And I think and I think it's really important to mention, this. They're mining, especially the institutional miners, are mining responsibly.
Yep.
Right. I mean, especially on the ERCOT grid, being able to, saying, hey, yeah, we're just going to shut down. Like, well, I mean, if need be, we have another snowpocalypse here, like we had last year. It's just they'll shut it all down. I mean, go to zero if they have to, and that's built in. So, like he said, they're using power that's not going to go anywhere anyway, right? We in order to get the power from one place where we need it to another, there's this huge infrastructure and
Transmission.
yeah, and when you're transmitting from here to here, there's a loss, right? So if this doesn't need it and they're going to lose it here, well, they just basically cut it here and say, let's use this power that we have to keep generating and have to have. It's a smaller percentage, but let's take advantage of it and use it for something that's actually going to, help us out.
Yeah, we have a significant and growing number of power generation companies that are using mining to actually increase the efficiency of their generation.
Yeah.
People don't realize that these generators can't operate with no load. And you can't spin these generators up just instantly when you need them. So they have to be constantly operating efficiently. And so without that secondary load that's provided by the miners, the power generators themselves are actually going to be losing money in terms of maintenance in this. One of the key reasons why they're going to immersion is both the increase in the ability to get greater hash rate with less capital intensive investment in miners, but also it's the full recovery of the heat. As you were talking about earlier, I have customers that heat their pools, heat their homes. I have whole communities up in Scandinavia that heat the streets in order to prevent the use of salt and snow cleaning. So you could create an entire profile of how we can reuse the heat that's created out of mining and using immersion, recapture all that. So from an ESG perspective, if that's a big concern, immersion mining, there is no greener approach to this.
Absolutely. And being able to take that, as soon as I saw an ASIC as something that generates Bitcoin and I saw it instead as a profitable heater, it just changed everything for me. We have a local Bitcoin meetup up in Minneapolis, and it's at a whiskey distillery, and they have an 8,000-gallon tank of water that they're constantly heating with natural gas. And so we're working to actually convert that into using immersion mining to actually heat all that water that they use in the pre-processing of their whiskey distillery to get off of that natural gas. So you have it's actually profitable to heat all that water that they're already doing anyway. So there's heat demands for everything everywhere. And if we can take those ASICs and use that energy to productive use, how can you say that's not?
That's right.
That's not useful.
Just a really good example. How many people in this room own a pool? If you're not heating your pool with your Bitcoin miner, you are completely losing out on a massive opportunity to save yourself a life.
I actually have a fish pond at home and I heat it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we do tilapia ponds too all the time.
And so if you have a pool, it's probably usually cold because you don't want to spend the money to heat it up. But think if you had it always warm all the time, and the warmer it was, the more money you're making. Would you not have a warm pool all the time? Right now, today in Minneapolis, I think it's about 20 degrees or so in Minneapolis, and my pool is 95 degrees.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Hey guys, we do have a couple of microphones. I'm going to save a few minutes for questions. I'm sure there's lots of you in here that can ask very intelligent questions on mining. I'm the guy who almost electrocuted himself on live video trying to set up my miner, which is where I earned a lot of respect for the job that these guys do, and most of you running a mining farm, because I was just running 2 miners in my cabin up in Pennsylvania, and it was not easy and trivial, like when it's not your job. But after that, it's like, okay, now I understand what they do. So I do encourage everyone to run a miner, just like I encourage everyone to run a node. You need to understand how the entire system functions when it comes to Bitcoin. So I'm sure somebody here has a question for the guys on the panel. Otherwise, we'll just keep going. All right. Oh, there's a microphone right there.
Right. Yeah, speaking of everybody wanting to get an example, if you come over to the booth, we actually have a full immersion miner actually operating. You can put your hand in the fluid. You can see all the components. So it's a great visual on what a large and a small system looks like.
Yeah, hi. I totally agree with you on liquid versus air. I guess the only question I would ask, and I know we've been putting electronics, transformers and oil for 70 plus years, but I would really wonder, there's a big push in high-performance computing in data centers for DLC, right?
Yeah.
Direct liquid cooling right on the chips. And I know for some of these small chips, it doesn't make sense. But if a system was designed for that versus something designed for air and kind of retrofitting in oil, aren't you going to get a lot of the same benefits with maybe, some of the downsides?
Cold plate.
So we actually, so our company's been around since I guess about 2010, patents filed around 2013, and we started out focusing on traditional data centers. And now you've seen a really interesting push that there was a push a few years ago, everybody's going to the cloud. It's all about the cloud, right? You have access to your data, but then you realize there are some applications where that doesn't make a lot of sense. Even the latency is just enough to cause issues, right? And so people are large companies are starting to bring that data back closer to their employees from a physical aspect, right? Geographically speaking. So there's this push for now, you may hear like edge computing. All that is a data center that used to be like run your data center closet, like old school before the cloud, right? But what they're doing now is kind of a hybrid. So where we want to have all this bandwidth and throughput, most of our data here, and then we want it backed up for redundancy on the cloud. We have systems that work in almost the exact same fashion, right? But they're made for your traditional server rack-mounted servers design. So, but it's almost identical. The benefits are the same. The main one is not necessarily overclocking per se. It's density. So where you used to put 10 to 15 kilowatts in a rack, you can now put, with our system, you can put like 150 to 200 kilowatts in a rack. So that means, what are we going to see on the more enterprise side moving forward? We're at a point in technology, both on mining and traditional, where we're literally at a point where air cooling isn't going to cut it much longer. The next few generations of chips that come out are going to produce so much power, use so much power, and produce so much heat. Exactly. Air can't handle it. So there has to be a better way, right? I think all of us deal with, for the most part, single phase.
I want to answer his question on the direct-to-chip, though.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so cold plates are basically liquid-cooled heat sinks, right? You run water through it. And listen, it's used today in a lot of different applications. But when you analyze the amount of infrastructure, we did this on a Lenovo server, one of their highest performance ones. There was $3,000 of copper tubing, heat sinks, and everything on board that we were able to strip off.
Yeah.
And then we were actually able to increase beyond what their current capability was another 50% by using immersion. So you get two real benefits in comparison to direct-to-chip. One is you don't have to have water in your data center. That, is, to my mind, is just a failure waiting to happen. Anytime you're bringing water in anywhere near electronics, you've got a big liability issue to do. The other one, though, is the lack of flexibility. Every one of those cold plates has to be custom manufactured to that custom chip. Whereas in immersion, you can drop almost anything into one of our tanks. And and that's the big advantage. And it was stated earlier, as technology progresses, we're not asking you to upgrade your entire infrastructure to take advantage of that. We're also not locking you into a single server or miner manufacturer. So you get a lot of flexibility. People used to come in and ask me all the time about tub designs, tank designs. Why would you do a tank? The answer is quite simple. It's because you can put anything in it with relatively small amounts of modification. To go cold plate, you're basically dedicating yourself to a single server thing.
Going in that too, then you're only cooling that one chip, that one small area. Where you're going in immersion, you're cooling everything. So if you have other chips around that are warm, but maybe not as extremely hot, you're cooling that entire system rather than just the single chip. And then you don't have any problems with condensation.
Yeah, that goes into the power supply issue as well. If you dunk the power supply in the immersion, you don't get that with that. So there's a lot of benefits.
All right, guys, we do have 2 more questions, so we have just enough time for them. Let's go to this side over there.
Hey guys, been doing immersion for a little while. Own a bunch of Gary's fluids. So anybody that's doing air-cooled mining, immersion is the way to go as far as I'm concerned. I think one of the things that we're able to take advantage of right now with immersion is because none of these manufacturers are making products specifically for immersion, right? So when we take them and we put them in immersion, we get this huge efficiency bump right now. Now, it may not be that way in the future as the rest of the manufacturers come around to seeing that this is the more efficient way to do it. But I think that that's something that everybody needs to understand to take advantage of right now. The other thing I would say about the best benefit of immersion is it's a semi-closed system, right? Like, you know, when you're air cooling, anything that's in that atmosphere goes straight through that miner, right? But when you're doing liquid immersion, you've got this semi-closed process that keeps your miners nice and clean and safe. So hats off to all of you guys that are promoting these.
All right, thanks, man. Any quick comment on,
Yeah, I
on
was
the
gonna say,
future of the hardware?
Yeah, for the hardware, you know, we're taking stuff that was designed for air cooled or putting it in oil, but I'd love to see manufacturers starting their design from the very beginning. This is going to be in oil. That's the only way it's going to run. It will never run on air, and it'll completely change the design.
So I can tell you that we're working with 2 miner manufacturers today that are designing immersion-only miners. And in addition to that, MicroBT, and you can see it over at our booth, has actually gone ahead and issued a factory-authorized immersion cooling firmware. And I really hats off to them for you know, going out and acknowledging that this technology is the way of the future.
All right, one last question right there.
It's actually 2 quick questions, but one, I just wanted to get your thoughts. I know, Gary, you're a huge fan of single phase. I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on, you know, multi-phase system. And then second, if you have, you know, strong recommendations on any firmware that you guys have had really good luck with.
Yeah, first thing that pops in my mind with the other phase, I mean, it's extremely expensive right now. And I mean, I love the fact that we're innovating towards that. To me, I'm just a complete engineer head, so the more and more we do that, keep innovating towards that, let's find other stuff. But at the end of the day, right now, the costs, it's insane. Far outweighs it.
And further to that, I mean, the risk with it, if you have an operator that operates the system improperly or and leaves it open, I mean, there's been instances where you...
It's done. If you leave it open, it's done. Literally.
Literally. I
It
mean,
could literally
you're losing
evaporate.
millions of
And the
dollars
health
worth of-
issues, guys.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
health issues.
Two-phase coolants are basically fluorinated fluids, and you can go online. Right now, they're being highly regulated in Europe. They're going to be fully regulated here in the U.S., and it's only because of efforts by 3M and others to keep them off the Class 1 regulation list that they still exist. Companies like Intel have completely banned their use except in very specific instances because of health.
Yeah, you just bring up a good point, right? Like the way that the government loves to demonize stuff, and I'm not going to get too political with the whole COVID stuff, but if immersion cooling mining becomes very good for a Bitcoin ecosystem, are you scared that the governments are going to make it so illegal that you can't use it so they can prove how bad mining is?
No, I think we have a real trump card here in immersion. And the trump card is that the government is using it themselves.
Yeah, exactly. They are.
So if they go out to demonize it, I think we're going to have a real issue of hypocrisy. But beyond that, the economic and the ecological benefits of using single phase are just beyond any contravention. It's very difficult. We have a fully recyclable product, right? It's a closed ecosystem. If you purchase our product and you send it back to us, we can completely reprocess that product into new coolant. So none of it goes back into the landfill.
Going to your firmware, you know, there's definitely a lot of options out there. I've been using Brains OS for quite a while. I just love that it's open source. It's out there. It's a good team behind it. There's Vanish. There's ASIC.io. I think there's quite a few others, but finding one that you're comfortable with, like that actually has been made for that specific model, you know, that'll go a long way. And depending on what you want from it, like, do you want to just disable the fans and that's it? You know, What's Mine has released their factory authorized firmware directly. You can just go with that. If you want to do more advanced stuff and actually have API calls from stuff and do you know, wattage differences and whatnot, something like Brains is definitely the way to go.
All right, we got a few minutes left. Let's just end with, where do you see the future going in general, or maybe where's your company going to be focused on going into the future? Like, I'm envisioning right now, after listening to all this, like a tank the size of this room with like thousands of miners in it. But like,
a little problematic.
We'll start on that end with you, Gary, and go this way.
So my vision is to take a pool, completely fill it with BitCool, and simply drop racks into it as opposed to what we do now.
Sounds like the
I think that would be the far most efficient way of cooling all these devices. And I think it would look so radically cool if we put a bunch of LEDs and stuff into it. Where it's really going though is that immersion is being accepted across hundreds of industries. I mean, we work not just in the Bitcoin mining industry, but in the electric vehicle space, in the transformer space, in the electric engine space. Shipping is being electrified. Anywhere that you see the use of lithium-ion batteries, electricity, electric motors, all of those things are being immersion cooled today. We even do LEDs on these universal sound stages today. So we're in a great place, and I will tell you that the acceptance of immersion by Bitcoin mining has driven all of those other industries to accept it.
All right, Jonathan, go for it.
You know, for my part, I love the at-home mining. I love all the homebrew stuff that's going on, and so I'm really working towards a large, small-scale setup. So single tank ASICs, dual tank, so you can just actually plug it in at home, not annoy your spouse, and I imagine like entire cities then working with the power provider. Where up in Minnesota we have like a smart switch where it'll turn off your air conditioner if you're on a program. You get a reduced rate, and so you could have a reduced rate working with your power provider. Like, you know what, I'm going to run this every day except for the most demand, and they can shut it down. And so you would have that in your home, providing heat if you need it, and then not when you shut it down, and still get a good rate on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from our standpoint, we're trying to continue to build a modular solution, integrate it into a pod that's ready to go, but further drive those improvements on the power supply, like I alluded to earlier, adding to the benefits of what you're getting from immersion, but also getting an extra anywhere from 10 to 15% bump in power efficiency from the power supply as an integrated solution.
Yeah, for elite mining, we're really trying to push the envelope on innovation. So for us, it's about really similar to what Scott just said, which is mobile solutions and how you can control the fate of your mining container versus a power company that locks you in for 5-10 years, and then you have this gigantic building there. If they have the leverage. They have the leverage. So if there's an issue ever with that 5-10 years down the road, with elite mining, what we're focused on is actually being able to say, see you later, guys, if you don't want to deal with me. So there's that. Also on top of that, really focused on heat exchanging systems and how to create good modular solutions that are hybrid versions of geothermal versus using water and dry coolers, and then being able to condense that and make the application of modular and remote systems even denser than they already are today. So we're really focused on that ourselves as well.
All right, David, close us out.
I think to echo kind of some of what Gary said as well, right? This is, someone asked how we got into mining, and I said, well, we were violently shoved into it about a year ago, right? It's kind of how it works. And I was very happy, right, that we were orange-pilled that way. But I think what's really interesting is it really is driving the adoption in so many industries that we have no clue what's going on right now. We have an inkling of it, but like autonomous vehicles, right? I mean, the amount of compute power, AI required for that to actually come to fruition, right, is a ridiculous amount of data. I mean, the average person uses like a couple gigs worth of data a day, and autonomous cars would need like 4,000 or 5,000 times that amount, right? And it's always processed so quickly. So immersion cooling is really driving this edge data that would give us the ability to have these really interesting AI and kind of high computing power, kind of applications. So it'd be really interesting to see how that comes to fruition.
There's over 1.5 million devices immersed today.
There you go.
Fluid globally.
Yep. There you
And
go.
it's only growing, and I want to thank everybody on this panel for both being good friends and good customers, and for those of you.
Awesome. Thank you
Been
so
a pleasure,
much.
Gary.
So a round of
Very much.
applause that we ended right on time. Perfect.